So we've been talking about our research design in the last chapter, and one of the more important components of that are establishing our research methods that allow us to lay out how we're going to answer our question. Again, keep in mind some of the basic examples we gave on the first day when we gave the example of if you wanted to find out if your boyfriend was really cheating, if you wanted to be able to show this factually, something that you might have a hypothesis about. So we talked about how you might ask questions. You might, try and set up a thirst trap. You might try and see if you can find a way to put yourself in place to observe him in the act. So even in using those parallels, it kind of aligns with some of the methods that you'll use here. Obviously, we're not going to use the term thirst trap when you write the method summary, but the same, principles still apply of how you go about getting information. Keep this in mind as we go through this because, methods, I know for me, I'll speak for myself. I know when I first got introduced to them, they were very intimidating for me and really, hard to kind of understand and how to apply which. In this class, again, yours should be simple. The primary method that each of you are going to use is going to be secondary data analysis, given the time that we have in this class. But it is vitally important. Again, you have to do a method summary. And as you go through your sources to complete your lit review, one of the things that you're going to have to speak to is the methods that these authors use and how they're getting this information. As always, make sure that you're really clear on what you're supposed to know at the end of each chapter. And we'll break these down in more detail in a moment. Please make sure that you're staying with me on the reading. We're moving, no pun intended, we're zooming through this class as we're now into the second week of February. Things are, really spaced out to kind of give you the time to, not just read this stuff, but make sure that you read it for comprehension. Come with any questions you may have, and then implement some of these things into some of the assignments you're working on. Not a single person reached out this week to schedule a meeting to go over the annotated bibliography. Still waiting for some rough drafts on that. I hope that, again, you can take advantage of some of the assistance that will be given to you. The sooner you get it, the more helpful it is. Getting it, feedback a day or two before the assignment is due probably won't be the best strategy, but we still got enough time here now. But some of us have to lose this habit of procrastination very quickly. Procrastination is not a trait that is going to serve you well in almost any area of life. You don't want to procrastinate as it relates to like stacking your money. You don't want to procrastinate as it relates to like being in control of your health. You don't want to procrastinate as far as some of your career objectives. And courses like this will facilitate that.
Dr. Muhammad.
Yes, ma'am.
I sent it to you because we was conversating in 2 emails. I sent it in both of them.
Okay, for sure. I will look that over, and I will have feedback for you by no later than this time tomorrow.
I'm gonna send it again because
I did see that. The last part broke up. I'm sorry.
I said I'm gonna send it again because I added more to it.
Okay, even better. Absolutely. And we start, and again, go back if you need to and look at some of the lectures from last week where I tried to get you all started on how to go about searching for sources. So at least start that process. Again, I don't expect you to have, all the sources to be perfect, but it's, that's something that should not be as time consuming. Now, actually going through the sources, and again, all you got to do is go through the abstracts for this class. That may be a little bit more time consuming, but it's not something that you have to do by yourself. Yes. Well, I don't have the assignment in front of me. Janai asked, is the 18th the last date? If that's what it says on the assignment, then yes. But I do not have it in front of me now. And again, don't wait till the 18th. What if, again, I get pulled into some meetings the day before? What if all the students for the rest of my classes have sent me rough drafts? So, try and, do it in a way where you can get the most helps and benefits as possible. It doesn't have to be a completed rough draft. The more that you put into it, I think the better feedback you'll get. But that's something I really encourage everybody to do. Oftentimes what happens, Nashai, is students will get their graded paper back and like, well, I didn't know what you wanted. Whose fault is that exactly?
The students.
You don't have to guess. Find out for sure. So one of the main things that you want to look at here is the type of research that's appropriate for experiments. And make sure, again, that you're listening while you're taking this stuff down. Because much like example that we went through in terms of finding out if you're due to cheated, not every method is going to be that effective to really get at the heart of that information. So the same way, not every method can be used for every research question. That finding out, for example, that one of the research questions that looks at physical abuse, DeVicious research, it would be unethical for us to subject that to an experiment. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why in a moment. Now, for your method summary, young people, for your method summary, and make sure you're listening while you're taking notes, for your method summary, it will not be sufficient to just say, I could conduct an experiment. Because as you'll see in this chapter, there are several different types of experiments. So for the chapter on experiment, for example, I told you the chapters that you can look at, to help you write the paper. The chapter on experiments is probably going to give you 6 or 7 different methods by itself. Again, the chapter on experiments is going to give you at least 6 or 7 methods by themselves. So there are many different types of experiments. You can use each of those and apply it to your research question. But again, you got to understand the method, Nashia, to ensure that you apply the method effectively. And as always, you don't have to do this by yourself, but I can't come to your homes and help you. I need you to let me know when you need help. So again, as always, look at the chapter outline and try and, if you haven't started reading this yet, try and get started and read it in bits and pieces. So experiments involve taking action on behalf of the researcher and observing the consequence of that action. So think of it in a small way where, some of your science projects where you might have been in junior high or something, and you might want to create a volcano. And you want to say, hey, if I pour this ingredient in, let me step back and observe what's happening. We've all done personal experiments all the time, right? With ourselves. What are some examples that you could think of? We've all experimented. And I don't just mean some of y'all drug experimentations from high school. I ain't got to tell you about that. What are some things that you've experimented with? Anybody?
Hair.
Excellent, Vici. 1 extra credit point. That's a great example. That's exactly what I was looking for. That you tried new hairdo. So I'm going to say, y'all know who Odell Beckham is, the football player? Detasia, I'm going to experiment and see if that hairdo will work for me. That's how I'm going to be in class on Tuesday. I'm going to then observe the consequences. I know you don't think I could do it, but watch. I'm going to come here on fly on Tuesday. So I'm going to take action. I'm going to change my hair. And then I'm going to observe the consequences of that action. Some people like Detasia might be looking at me, on screen all crazy. Devicia probably going to be trying to get some extra credit brownie points, telling me she really liked my hair. But for the most part, right, we're going to observe, the reaction of people that don't know us or people that haven't seen us. And we're not going to look at what they say. We'll look at how they, naturally react. And from that, we'll learn okay, look, maybe this hairdo did not come, across quite as well as I had hoped when I was getting ready in the mirror this morning. Any other experiments that you've taken with your person, again, personally? And utilize these examples of your classmates because I think it'll help you understand them. Any other experiments you've done? Anybody at all? Let me look at the chat real quick. I'm sorry. Attire, good. So you may okay, look, This is not my normal style. I'm finna get me some skinny jeans tonight and see how it work. I ain't got none yet, but you know, get squeeze up in there. See if it worked for the boy. Have my Odell Beckham hairdo, my skinny jeans, be a regular metrosexual millennial. It's gonna be dope. I'm just kidding, sort of. So we do this again with like diets. If you've ever cooked anything, I can't really cook very well, but you know, you like, you know what? Let me try this with some pepper this time. Okay, I made this with like, you know, some shrimp last time. Let me see how it is with chicken. And you observe the action. Again, these are simple and basic, but like not every experiment has to be overly complicated. One of the things that we talked about, Janai, in the beginning is like, you know, really honing in the concepts and measures and that you're trying to use. You got to be very clear and concise. So that's why, like, you know, in scientific laboratories and something like that, they're like, okay, you got to add like, you know, 3 bases of, you know, 3 millimeters of acid. Then you got to add like, you know, 2 kilometers of, you know, I don't know. I'm not a chemist, so I mean, give me the talking. But y'all understand what I'm saying, right? You have to be very precise. With recipes, again, y'all have cooked stuff. Most of you, or you have seen things cooked. So with that, you got to be very precise. If it's say 4 eggs that you need to put in, Janaya, 6 eggs might create a totally different, like, you know, reaction. So you got to be very precise with your concepts and your propositions. Exactly what you're trying to measure. You can't say like, you know, teenagers, Latasia, you got to be okay, 13 to 17-year-olds or something along those lines. So keep this in mind for social experiments, right? And as you go through the chapters, make sure that you look at some of these examples of experiments. When we get to the chapter on surveys, the author is going to give you a lot of examples to give you some really clear-cut definitions of how these ideas work. So again, we talked about hypothesis, and what is a hypothesis again, young people? What's a hypothesis again? Anybody? Come on, y'all. Don't do me like this. Not you, Janai. I'm not even gonna look at what you're saying in the chat. Somebody else got to carry this. Hypothesis. Yeah, look, man. Go ahead, Avicia.
You hear what I said?
Nope.
I said educated guess.
Good. And I will add on to that, an educated guess, one extra credit point for you, Devicia. An educated guess that explains the relationship between variables. An educated guess that explains the relationship between variables. An educated guess that explains the relationship between variables. I've said this several times in order because these are important concepts. Now, it's my expectation, young people, that if I ask y'all this like next week or even 10 minutes from now, that y'all are able to remember it. That's something like, you know, you should be able to remember all throughout grad school. As upperclassmen in the social science department, most of y'all should know this already. I don't say this as a criticism, but you know, you like, it's okay not to know something. You should see this as a problem if you don't know this by now. It's either a problem that we haven't been teaching you all effectively enough, and that happens. Or it's a problem in the efforts that you're taking in between these classes to get this information. So in this situation, right, we want to like, you know, we don't believe, Deidre, that things just happen for no reason. We believe that as scientists, we can explain the cause and effect of anything. So for example, Latasia, we don't believe that people just are, you know, are born prejudiced. Maybe they are. We don't believe that. But in science, we try not to really deal that much with belief. We try and get factual, observable information. So we believe that even if people may have prejudice against a group such as Muslims, that we can reduce that prejudice. Again, that we can take an action and introduce one variable, Diamond, and it can have an effect on another. So again, we're going to introduce education. And we believe through education, according to this hypothesis, that education is going to reduce prejudice. Again, we talked about variables, right? When there's like for 2 extra credit points, don't look at your notes. Don't look at your notes. What's a correlation? What do we mean by correlation for 2 extra credit points? Janai, you can chime in on this one if you want to. Better be quick though, your classmate's gonna beat you. What's a correlation?
A relationship between two or more things.
Say it one more time, Devusia.
What's your relationship between two or more things?
On the right track. On the right, it is good.
What do you got something to do with?
Nope. Nope, not a factor that has a reaction. All right, so take 2 minutes and look through y'all notes and somebody tell me. Yes, Lashaya. But what about this? But tell me a little bit more about the relationship.
Is it an empirical relationship between two variables such that changes in one that's associated with changes in others, or particular attribute? I don't know that word, in the other.
That's exactly what it is. Now, does anybody want to try and break that down in their own words? Because obviously y'all had it in the author's words and ain't nobody remember that. That's why like it's so important to actually study and make this stuff your own. Because if I ask y'all that like 100 times, you're probably not going to remember that definition word for word. I'm not going to remember that definition word for word. Say it one more time, Detasia.
That was Deja.
I'm sorry, say it one more time. Detasia.
Sorry.
Say your definition one more again.
She said that was Deja.
That was Deja that said it.
I wasn't talking to you, Latasia.
It is an empirical relationship between two variables such that changes in one are associated with changes in the other, or particular attributes in one are associated with particular attributes in the other.
Okay, good. So what do y'all think that means? Get better, Janai, if they relate. What are some examples that y'all can see that definition in your book, in your notes? Obviously, it didn't register that much because can't nobody break down what it means. Are there any examples that the professor gave you at the time that might also be in your notes that help you?
It was the higher the family income, the higher the family reading scores.
Good, excellent. So so what do you think happens? What might be a simple way of breaking down what a correlation is, given that definition, that example? So changes in one variable produces changes in another. Changes in one variable produces changes in another. That again, income, the higher the income goes up, the higher the pay goes up. But which variable was the cause?
The family income?
Yes. Because again, right, you all have independent, dependent variables in your research, so you're saying that, again, the lower the income, the more depressed you get. The more children you have, the more likely you're to stay in an abusive relationship. Now, is this coming through at all? It's a bit of a frustrating discussion, young people. We waste a lot of time by having to go back over things that we should have understanding of already. So in this situation, the author is making a hypothesis that there's a correlation between education and prejudice. The more that a person gets educated, the less that their level of prejudice goes down. Think about this for your own research. Again, you're looking at independent variables, sometimes more than one. It's all wonderful to see you all taking notes. This is not helpful at all if you can't remember anything. It is not that you can't remember anything because you got naturally bad memories. It's not because you're not intelligent. It's because we're not putting it the same reason that people can remember anything. Like, again, you can remember songs that you don't like the words to. I mean, you don't that you don't even like, but you know the words. Why? Because you've been exposed to it so much. There's a cause and effect. The more that you hear anything, the more it's going to stick. That's true of people like 100 years ago. It's going to be true of people 100 years from now. So we can continue to do these daily experiments where you'll pretend to like that you're actually like, being serious students. But then we see the data and the lack of knowledge that's produced in these type of settings. Let's do better. The independent variable is, again, what causes the effect. And again, we believe that education can cause prejudice to be reduced, that if we educate people more, and let's be clear, educate people more about Islamic culture, that people become more prejudiced. That's a hypothesis. Now, an important aspect of experimenting is pre-testing and post-testing. Pre-testing and post-testing. And again, make sure that you're listening, because part of the reason why we can't remember this stuff is that, we're often distracted and doing other things while the class is going on. And/or we're only taking notes on what's been written down and are not really trying to, understand the material. So for experiments are like, for us to be able to measure the effect of the variable, we need to be able to study people's level of prejudice before they're educated. We're going to introduce this variable of education, and we're going to see observe what the level of prejudice is before, after that. Let's look at, again, these aspects of the classical experiment in more detail. As I said in this chapter, you're going to see many different types of experiments. There's not just one type of experiment in social science. The classical experiment is one such method. These are things that, so again, when we do we talk about pre-testing and post-testing. I don't expect y'all to know this information now because you haven't gotten it. I'm introducing a variable of giving you this information in the notes, information that you should have read already. That should be the leading variable. Would it be unreasonable of me to expect you to be able to know some of this stuff after this variable has been introduced? Like, we should see some change. If you don't know anything else, if you don't know, have more knowledge after you've been exposed to this information, like, you should see that as a problem. And again, the problem may not always be with you all. It could be with me. But if there's something along here that, you need me to go over, that you don't understand this well, that you read that didn't make that much sense, let me know that. Otherwise, we got to do better than we've been doing. These things are not overly complicated. These things are stuff that you've been exposed to in different forms before. But don't just try and memorize these definitions. That's not intelligence. And you are too intelligent to cheat yourselves like that. And this education isn't very cheap. I know there was some consternation about, student fees and things like that. But y'all gonna cheat yourselves here? Like, get your money's worth on everything. And to be clear, I understand the consternation over fees. You all should demand, clarity and stuff like that. And you should demand, more of us in general. But I need you all to begin to demand more of yourselves as well with all the time that you invest in this stuff. Not a good look to come out of here 4 years, 80,000 in the hole, and your knowledge has only increased marginally from where you began. It's like getting a gym membership, going every day, paying them like hundreds of dollars for 4 years, and you gain 10 pounds. Pre-testing. This is the measurement of the dependent variable along subjects. And again, keep in mind what we mean by the dependent variable that precedes the effect or outcome. An example that we gave, prejudice is a dependent variable. That your level of prejudice, and write these things down, your level of prejudice is dependent upon your level of education. Your ability to remain in an abusive relationship is dependent upon how many children you may have. The educational development of children is dependent upon whether they stay in a single parent female household or male single parent household. Your level of depression during COVID is dependent upon your level of income. And please write those examples down. If you didn't get them, the lecture is being recorded for you. Post-testing is again, so we introduce this dependent variable. And there's example, education. We observe people's levels of prejudice against Muslims. We introduce a variable of education. And after they've been exposed to this education, our independent variable, we're going to measure their level of prejudice and see if education had an impact. Again, with the vaccine for COVID, it involved pre-testing and post-testing. What are your symptoms? Again, like when you've been sick, whether it be you taking a cold medicine or, grandma's secret remedy. What were my symptoms before? Now I'm going to introduce this medicinal variable, not a Red Bull, but y'all get what I'm saying. I'm going to see how I feel afterwards. Same thing that happened with the vaccine. And again, we've done this many times in different elements of our own lives. Yeah, secondary data analysis is a research method. It is not an experiment. So a group of subjects to whom experimental stimulus is administered is your experimental group. The control groups, again, within the vaccine or almost any medications that they put out to the public, they generally will have an experimental group and a control group. Unfortunately, like, the Tuskegee experiment, the Black people were the control group. So they wanted to see, we have this cure for syphilis. One group we're going to give this medication to, and we're going to see the development of their symptoms before they had this new medicine. And now we're going to look at it afterwards. Another group we're not going to give the medication to, we're going to see what happens. So we can study development of how syphilis goes in the body. One of the things this chapter talks about that I'm not going to press you all too strongly about are the ethics of research. Since you all are not doing experiments, we're not going to talk about it as much here. But a lot of the ethics of how we do experiments and why, for example, we don't use humans that much in terms of experiments like that is, came from the Tuskegee experiment. So again, we need to isolate, and keep this in mind, right? Because this is not always possible in every type of research. Being able to isolate an independent variable. In almost all of your research, that's going to be very challenging. So hear me out, don't just write. Yes, it's true that being in a single parent household, a female single parent household may affect your development differently than being in a male headed household. But it's also possible that other things could affect that as well. So it'll be tough for us to know that the only thing that affected this is them being raised in a female-headed household. That's okay. Again, as we talked about, right, that in social science and just in life in general, it's very rare that something happens for one reason and one reason only. Again, it's very rare that something happens for one reason and one reason only. A lot of simple human beings often talk in this way, that people behave this way like because they're women. People behave like this because they're Black. People behave like this because they come from a single parent family. All of those things can have an effect on your behavior. But if that was the case, then we would see the same things happen in every single parent family, and that just doesn't happen. So you want to be very careful with your language. And we want to isolate the independent variable. So the main thing with an experiment that you can do with secondary data analysis, you can do with surveys, is that an experiment allows you to isolate your variable. And you can say, okay, it's this one thing or two things that's having an effect. The findings ain't going to be perfect, but that's what they're trying to do here, to isolate the variables. Again, most of us as human beings, there are like 200 reasons why we do almost anything. Does me being a man affect many of my choices? Does me being Black affect my choices? Of course. Does it affect everything? No. Are those the only things that create effects? No. So keep this in mind. Very quickly, and make sure you're listening while you're taking notes. One of the things that we often wonder about is how do people become violent? How do people become aggressive? So there have been many classical experiments that have tried to explain this. And they'll put so for example, it's been hypothesized, Diamond, that young people in America are more violent and aggressive because they play violent and aggressive video games. So a classical experiment that's been utilized to try and test this, and make sure that you're listening and you got my independent variables, be writing them down on your own. Test yourself to make sure that you understand this stuff, even if I don't give them. In this situation, and again, they wanted to, the dependent variable, I will tell you this, is violent and aggressive behavior. So we may take 15 group of kids and we may have them play Grand Theft Auto, maybe a sport game type cat. So some type of drug shoot 'em up game. I'm trying to think of this military game. Anyway, have them play a whole bunch of video games for a couple of hours. You have another group of kids and you have them play more cooperative games. Then we let these kids out and we sit back and observe their behavior. Now, beforehand, Janai, we have to make sure that these kids are very similar. We have to make sure that, again, that their backgrounds, their ages, gender, that they're as similar as possible. As we talked about, that can be difficult sometimes. But in this way, it's allowing us to try and see if it's these video games that have caused this behavior. Because if they're the same in every other way, then that gives a little bit more power to this video games. Now, let me be clear here, Devicia. The researchers are not going to come out of that experiment and say that we have proven that video games, make people more violent. They'll say something like that there's a correlation. There appears to be a strong correlation between playing video games for this amount of time and violent and aggressive behavior. And again, they probably be even more specific with that in terms of their language. You want to be very, very careful with your writing. Now, I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know about y'all, based upon some of our class participation, based on some of my general questions to some of the things, basic concepts like hypotheses so far. I am a bit concerned with the level in which we've been reading, and even more concerned about, how we're going to perform on these projects. The good news is for us that there'll be many opportunities to be great in this class and to earn points. So I give you an opportunity on Tuesday when we meet, if you can begin the class by explaining to me what the Hawthorne effect is. Not in the author's words. Again, I could maybe get like a fourth grader to go and do that for me. But as adult critical thinkers, I want you to be able to take this definition, which you can find in your book, and break it down in your own words. If you get it wrong, it ain't like you lose any points. But let's try. I'll see you all on Thursday. I hope to see some rough drafts and some meeting appointments scheduled soon.
You said what? What we looking up again?
I can't remember.
Yes, you can.
Somebody help your classmate out, man.
Some kind of effect.
The Hawthorne effect.
Okay, thank you.
Peace, y'all.